scientific writing. Scientific writing predominantly refers to scientific articles, research articles. They are research papers which one writes based on the work done by him or her and communicates it to the journals. That's one. And another is those who gain some experience in an area can write review articles. Again, they are scientific communications. So review articles is another form of, but there is a difference. I mean, I will come to that part later. Now, what I'm trying to give you an idea that when we talk of, say, scientific communication, what all is included in that. So one, research publications, that is the original work done by a person. He or she wants to communicate to the journals in the form of research articles or research papers. So that's one. And then you can also summarize what's going on in an area with your own perspective. If you have understood an area of research so well and you have followed the research done in that area, okay, and then you can write a review article that, okay, this is what is going on, and based on this, you particularly feel that this is the future for this area. So review article is, as I mentioned, is written by fairly experienced persons in an area. An experienced person doesn't mean a person like me with gray hairs. Even a student who has read enough literature in an area as a PhD scholar can also write a review, in his area of research, which he or she has followed for 3-4 years, during his or her research work. So review articles is another one. And then book chapters, you can write chapters for the book as a scientist. So that is another form of communication. And books as a whole, no, you can write a book as well. So scientific communications or writings are basically, I've given you some examples where you need to communicate with it. Again, the audiences are very specific. You are targeting very specific audiences. Research articles are meant for a very specific audience, not for everybody. Those who are involved in that very specific area of research. Nowadays, it is so much compartmentalized, so much specialized that people follow little bit here and there other than their own areas, and mainly, so the number of people as an audience is getting reduced. But whatever. Similarly, research review articles in the book chapters of the books. You have an audiences, very specific audiences to address and things. Fine. So I'm sure books you have read, book chapters you have read, I'm sure reviews you have read, and also the scientific research papers you have read. In fact, during the last course, if you remember, I posted quite a few research papers for you to read. Can anyone reply whether you have read through those, at least those papers, quickly in your last course? In the Google class itself, I posted a couple of papers. Anyway, so fine. If you have not read that, I will advise you to read this. During this course, I'm going to give you a paper, which you can, to understand. It's just an example of scientific writing, So let us look at, again, I will try to revise or refresh your memories, characteristics of the scientific writing, you know. And since I believe all of you may go beyond your MSc level to research, and you will be writing. And in fact, during this course itself, you will get an opportunity. I don't know when this pandemic is really doing a job. You guys are supposed to do a project work in the last semester, and that's where all this is required. If you understand, you can make a good scientific communication in the form of reports or thesis. I mean, that is another form of scientific writing, you know. As an example, you write master's thesis or PhD thesis. That is also scientific writing, actually. Okay, so please follow this part of the course very carefully. It has an immediate application for you to use. You know, so the characteristics between technical writing and scientific writing, they overlap, as I mentioned. I mean, the objective is both the writings, the technical as well as scientific writing. You know, I mean, it should be clearly written. I mean, whatever you are writing, there should not be any ambiguity in conveying your material, whatever you want to convey. You should not go roundabout manner. It should be written straightforward, clearly, in a simple language, short sentences, and without complicating your thought. So your writing should be very, very clear, you know. So clarity is one of the major characteristics of scientific writing. It should be clearly written. It should not create doubt in the minds of reader that you may be meaning this, whereas you should be able to tell the reader that what you want, what you have in mind, what your questions are, what your answers are going to be, what are the experimental evidences you are going to put forth. Okay, so it should be very clearly written. Okay, so clarity is one characteristic which one has to keep in mind. And secondly, it should be neutral in the sense that you should not making assumptions, you know, in writing that everyone knows. For example, in scientific communication, sentences like this, everyone knows, that has no place, you know, or it can never be proved, like what you want to say. So this kind of statements should be avoided, you know, and you should very clearly write about your data and the conclusions which it is supporting, you know. So that is another characteristics which one has to keep in mind. And then the whole content should be structured logically, you know, whereas the text is divided into different headings, starting from beginning to end, and which ends with a conclusion wherever, whatever you want to write, whether scientific paper or review or book chapter. So all writing ends with a conclusion. So there should be, the whole article should be separated into different heads, or parts, you know, it should be properly structured, you know, um, with headings. Okay, for example, like if, say, if you look at a research paper, you have a title, you have an abstract, you have an introduction, material method, results, discussion, and then references, acknowledgement. You know? So there is a different, it's a structured material, you know, where you have the information is divided into different heads, and each head has a specific purpose there. And I'm going to go in details about all these heads and, later. But the point I'm trying to make here is that a scientific writing or communication should be logically structured. Okay, it should be divided into different headings. You know? And then it should have very clearly um, uh, objectives, okay, very clear objectives, you know, which should be supported by the experimental evidences and the support from work done by others. You know, so one has to be one has to be. I mean, this is another characteristic that the objectives have to be written very clearly, you know, and which should be supported by appropriate experimental evidences, you know, and whatever support from other works one is taking, they should also be acknowledged, you know, which is very, very important aspect of a scientific communication, that if you are taking support of a work done by other people, then that work has to be acknowledged by you. If you do not do that, that is a crime. And I'm going to talk about that after I finish this section, as that is referred as plagiarism. And it is an academic punishable offense if one does, whether it is in scientific communication, your paper can be retracted, and they are being retracted by, if they discover later that you have plagiarized some portion of that from others without giving them due credit, your paper can be retracted. You can lose your job if that come to know. I mean, your employer comes to know that you have done and your paper has been retracted. You can lose your job. So it is a very, very serious offense these days. So one has to be very, very careful in in uh, identifying and acknowledging the whatever support you are taking from others' work, which is already been published and it is in public domain. Okay, so with this kind of background, I will very specifically take the example of a scientific research paper, you know, and we'll discuss that how that research paper is built up, you know. So if you have gone through, I'm sure you have gone through, there's no question of if and buts, that a typical research paper has these following elements. It has a title, it has an abstract and summary towards the end, and then introduction, methods, results, discussion, and then the work cited, what we say references, acknowledgement. Acknowledgement, I will come to what is included. In fact, we are going to look at all these elements one by one, and then the appendix, if any. Okay, so a scientific communication basically has, a scientific research paper has these subheads. Okay, uh, this is a typical layout of a. If you look at the scientific paper or communication, it can be in the form of a research paper uh, into a journal, or it can be presented as an oral presentation in a conference or a poster presentation. I think I discussed a little bit about this part of poster presentation in some other reference context. Uh, uh, but here we will take it slightly in more detail, that a typical layout of a poster is, in poster, you are given a fixed area to use. Typically, 1.5 meter to 1 meter, by 1 meter is the size. It can vary, but by and large, it remains like this. Length and breadth, 1.5 meter to 1 meter. So this is the overall, a typical organization of a poster, So here you have the abstract number, etc., written in this corner, then the title, of the paper, and the list of authors, etc., affiliations. This comes in this part. And then you have this side, abstract, and then introduction and material methods. And this side, you have discussion, conclusion, and key references and acknowledgements, if any. And in the center, it should be your results, So, and then down below is you can mention which conference, when it was presented, means the name of the conference in short, abbreviated form, and then the time and the date and place held. So this is a typical, a layout of a poster. And in a research communication or paper, you have the same things. Same layout is there in a research paper. You have a title of a paper, the abstract, introduction, methods, results, discussion, references, and acknowledgements. So both are same. And this I showed you a layout, typical layout of a poster. I don't know how many of you have presented a poster. Has anybody made a poster to any your BSc time like this? I doubt if anyone of you, but I'm sure you would have seen that this is the typical layout of a poster, and similar thing goes for a research communication. But then the question is how to fill this space, how one decides the title of the work which you have done, how you introduce that work, how you write material methods, how you write your results, how you write discussion. That is the key part. Everybody knows that these are the required elements for scientific communication, but one has to fill these blanks, with appropriately. Poster gives you very little space for this purpose, but paper gives you slightly more. Normally there is no such page restriction, but still there is There is good journals that do page restrictions, but still one has to be very, very concise. But if your work is more, then that paper can be lengthy paper. Uh, so, but then the space is limited. One has to express himself or herself very um, clearly, concisely, and accurately, to the point, avoiding repetitions, redundancy, you know. So tomorrow I will look at one by one with example how these spaces are filled. Okay, so I'm stopping here, and